I had mixed feelings when the invite to our class reunion showed up in my inbox. It had been years since I'd seen most of my old classmates, and honestly, I didn't really care to. I had my own life now, my wife Julie, our house, and a steady routine that didn't leave much room for nostalgia. But then there was my wife Julie. She was excited. Too excited, almost. I hadn't realized how much she'd been looking forward to it. Maybe it was the nostalgia, or maybe something else. She convinced me to go, insisting it would be a fun night. She kept saying things like it'll be nice to reconnect and we'll have a great time. Just like the old days, her enthusiasm felt off. But I didn't say anything. Maybe I was being paranoid, but my gut was telling me something wasn't quite right. If these stories resonate with you, subscribe to Confession Cabin and join our community. Share your experiences in the comments. Your voice could bring comfort to someone who needs it. I hadn't realized it at the time, but Julie's excitement was a mask for something deeper. I had noticed the cracks in our marriage for months. Little things, her distant attitude, the long hours at work, the sudden lack of affection. I could tell something had shifted, but she always had an excuse. I'm just tired, she'd say. Or work's been crazy, you know how it is, and I'd let it slide. I didn't want to be the guy who overthought everything. I didn't want to start accusing her of things when there was no solid proof. But deep down, I felt the growing distance between us. She was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Despite my reservations, I agreed to go to the reunion. Maybe I was just trying to make her happy. Or maybe I was trying to convince myself that everything was fine. The night of the reunion came, and it was already shaping up to be a night I would never forget. We arrived at the venue, an old hotel ballroom, and I couldn't help but notice how Julie immediately seemed to slip into a different persona. She was bubbly, chatting away with people she hadn't seen in years, her laughter filling the room. But it wasn't the same laughter I'd heard before. It felt forced, like she was trying too hard to be the life of the party. And as I stood there watching her, I realized she was more concerned with how she appeared to everyone else than with being with me. The night seemed to drag on as I tried to make small talk with old friends. But all the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that Julie was just slipping away from me. The more she interacted with people, the more distant she became. I couldn't ignore how, in every interaction, there was a certain coldness toward me, a distance she hadn't bothered to hide. Every time I caught her eye, she'd look away quickly, almost like she was embarrassed by my presence. That's when the feeling really hit me. I wasn't just at a class reunion anymore. I was a spectator in my own marriage. The night of the reunion came. We arrived together, but there was this strange distance between us. Julie was radiant, laughing too much, like she was trying too hard to fit into a role. I couldn't help but notice the way she'd flirted with her old high school crush as soon as we entered. My stomach sank. I was starting to understand the game she was playing. The way she kept sidling up to him, brushing her hand against his arm, and laughing louder than anyone else in the room made it clear she was enjoying this. She was enjoying making me feel small, and it made my blood boil. I tried to shake it off. I told myself maybe I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid. But as the night wore on, it became more impossible to ignore. She kept gravitating toward him, like there was some unspoken connection that I wasn't part of. I tried to engage with some of the old classmates around me, but it felt like I was just going through the motions. I couldn't focus on anything else but her. At one point, I went to the bar to grab a drink, hoping it would help take the edge off. But as I was standing there, I saw Julie and her ex talking in the corner. He had his hand on her shoulder, and she didn't even pull away. She didn't even look my way. It was like I didn't exist. She was so caught up in the moment, laughing at his jokes, looking at him the way I used to. I tried to keep my composure, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I felt this sick feeling in my stomach, a mixture of confusion and betrayal. Why was she doing this? Why was she making a point to flaunt it right in front of me? Was it deliberate, or was I just reading too much into it? I walked away trying to clear my mind. I found a quiet spot near the back of the room and just stood there for a while, trying to make sense of everything. I felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. But the truth was, it was my life, and it was unraveling right before my eyes. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about her old crush. This was about her needing to make me feel small. She wanted to remind me in front of everyone that she could still make men fall for her, that she still had that power. I wasn't the man she wanted anymore. I wasn't the center of her world, and it stung in a way I didn't expect. It was like I was just a background piece in her life, something she could ignore when it suited her. And that realization hit harder than anything else that night. The reunion was filled with awkward small talk, but the most painful moments were the ones between Julie and me. She would brush past me with a look of pure indifference, as if I wasn't even there. At one point, she leaned in a little too closely to her ex, whispering something in his ear, her eyes never leaving mine. She didn't even care to pretend. The worst part was the smirk she shot me over her shoulder, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. It was like I was invisible. And that was far more painful than any outright confrontation could have been. I tried to make the best of it. I smiled, I made small talk with a few people I barely recognized, but nothing could drown out the feeling of betrayal. It was like I was just there for decoration, a background prop to her little performance. I could see her and her ex whispering and laughing, oblivious to everything happening around them. And every time I caught her eye, there was that same look, almost mocking. She was so blatantly enjoying the attention, and I was just left standing there, trying to hold on to whatever dignity I had left. As the night wore on, I could feel my patience wearing thin. I went to grab a drink, hoping it would calm me down, but when I came back, she was laughing with another guy, someone I didn't even know. He was touching her arm, and she didn't seem to mind. I couldn't remember the last time she'd touched me like that. Her hands, once warm and affectionate, now seemed to only go to others. She was so intent on showing off how desirable she still was, how much she could still captivate others. It made me sick. I had spent so much time trying to make her feel valued, trying to keep our marriage strong, and this is how she repaid me. By flaunting it in front of me, in front of everyone, it was like she was saying, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough." The worst part was that I couldn't even confront her. Not in front of everyone. Not like this. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel it closing in on me. I wanted to just walk out, to leave her there, but I couldn't. I was still holding on to some hope, some foolish belief that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the truth was, I knew exactly what was happening. She was tearing me down piece by piece in front of everyone, and I was letting her. By the time the night reached its peak, I was ready to leave. But it wasn't just the coldness anymore. I had figured out the real reason for her behavior. One of the guys she used to date came up to me. He'd always been friendly, a little too friendly with Julie back in high school. He didn't know the full story, but he seemed to be hinting at something, making small talk about how things were different now that we were married. It hit me like a ton of bricks. She'd been seeing him again. I couldn't shake the realization that she had been lying to me for months, probably even longer. She was flaunting it, parading around her old flings like they were trophies. And I was just the fool she kept around to keep up appearances. The idea that she had been seeing him again, sneaking behind my back, completely shattered any remaining trust I had left. I had no way of knowing how long this had been going on, how many other men had slipped through the cracks, but I knew I had been living in the dark. This wasn't just some flirtation at the reunion. It was bigger than that. She'd been checking out of our relationship long before tonight, and I had been too blind to see it. Every word the guy said, every smile she shot his way, just confirmed it. The worst part, she didn't even care to hide it anymore. She didn't care how I felt, how much it was killing me inside. It was as if I didn't matter at all. It was so obvious now that I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. I couldn't stand there any longer. I had to get away from them, from her, from everything. I walked out of the ballroom for a few minutes trying to collect myself, but I could barely catch my breath. The anger, the betrayal, the utter humiliation, it was too much. I couldn't believe how far she had gone, how little respect she had for me. I wanted to scream, to shout, but I knew that would only make it worse. When I went back inside, I saw Julie again. She was standing in the middle of a group, laughing and enjoying the attention, But when our eyes met, I saw something in hers that chilled me to the bone. It was like she had won. She had already made her decision, and nothing I could do would change it. That look was a quiet declaration that she was no longer mine. She had moved on, and I was just a shadow standing in the way. The realization hit me hard, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly lost. I couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the constant push and pull, the feeling of being trapped in a facade, it was all too much. As the night ended, I grabbed Julie's arm and pulled her away from the group. It wasn't about confrontation or words anymore. I had reached my breaking point. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I felt this deep, gnawing emptiness inside me, like I had been hollowed out by the weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't just the way she'd ignored me, the way she'd humiliated me in front of all those people. It was the realization that I had allowed it. That I had allowed her to tear me down and, worst of all, let it continue for so long. Julie turned to me with a look of mild surprise, like she hadn't even noticed how far we had drifted. But I could see it in her eyes. There was nothing there anymore. There wasn't even a hint of guilt. She didn't even bother to apologize or offer any explanation for her behavior. It was like she knew exactly what she was doing, and she had no intention of stopping. And in that moment, I knew that any words between us would be meaningless. She had already made up her mind. She didn't care about me. She didn't care about us. We didn't even make it to the car before I felt like I was suffocating. The silence between us was deafening. I wanted to scream, to ask her what had happened, to beg for an answer. But I knew there was no point. The truth had been laid bare before me tonight, in every smile she gave to another man, in every careless glance she threw my way. It had been building for months, and I had been too blind to see it. When we finally got in the car, I didn't even look at her. I didn't want to. I couldn't. I just stared out the window, my thoughts racing. I had been living a lie, and now I had to face it. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted, had been using me all along, and I had let her. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could feel was this overwhelming sense of loss. I had given everything to this marriage, to her, and in return she had taken it all for granted. I was nothing more than an afterthought to her, someone she could parade around when it suited her, but when the night was over, I was just the fool who didn't see it coming. I couldn't even bring myself to speak as we drove home. The silence between us wasn't just physical. It was the silence of a relationship that had died long before I was ready to admit it.